Good evening. After weeks of back and forth between Washington and New Delhi, America has finally agreed to release the required raw material for manufacture of vaccine in India. Now, this comes after weeks of wrangling. There was a lot of it in the public domain, but a lot more in multiple behind-the-scenes conversations. And yesterday, after the two NSAs spoke, it was made clear that America will release the requisite vaccine raw material. But one thing this entire episode has taught us, and one thing should stand out clearly, is that America, for all its lofty rhetoric, has once again put its own national interests first. In fact, the White House spokesperson last week said, "We want to make sure that Americans are vaccinated first." Given this, should India recalibrate its ties with Washington?
This is a critical lifeline support for India from the US. 318 oxygen concentrators being loaded at the JFK airport to help mitigate the COVID emergency faced by India. The US National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan spoke to his counterpart Ajit Doval and said that US had also identified the exact vaccine raw materials required for Covishield, and they too would be dispatched at the earliest. Serum Institute of India CEO Adar Poonawalla had raised a red flag after US President Joe Biden's executive order of enforcing the Defense Production Act had made it difficult for the company to procure raw materials. However, the shortfall, as per Poonawalla, was for Covovax.
Now the new challenge is, the really big one, is getting enough raw materials which are being hoarded globally, and whether it's for Novavax, the Covovax product, or Covishield, we don't want to be in a situation that we ramp up in 2 months, as we mentioned, and then we're running short of raw materials. That's why I've flagged it to the US and everyone else.
Meanwhile, the US is also under pressure now to give its surplus vaccines to India as well, so that vaccination from the 1st of May can be ramped up. However, so far no word on that from the US's end. But other countries in the West too have extended a helping hand. The UK will be dispatching the first batch of life-saving equipment on Tuesday. Their supplies will include 495 concentrators, 120 non-invasive ventilators, and 20 manual ventilators.
मुश्किल के इस वक्त में यूके भारत के साथ हैं। प्रधानमंत्री बोरिस जॉनसन ने आज ऑक्सीजन कंसंट्रेटर्स और वेंटिलेटर्स भारत को भेजने का फैसला किया है। कोरोना को हराने के इस जंग में यूके भारत के साथ कंधे से कंधा मिलकर आगे बढ़ रहा है।
India has imported 23 mobile oxygen generation plants from Germany. These are being airlifted for use in AFMS hospitals. Each plant can produce 40 litres of oxygen per minute. France and the European Union have also extended support to India in terms of critical supplies. With Maha Siddiqui, Anisya Kumar for CNN News 18.
Now, we're just getting in breaking news on this story from a person named Tim Manning. He's the White House's COVID-19 supply coordinator, and he's put out a bunch of tweets just moments ago. And I quote, this is what the US is saying. I quote, "We diverted our pending orders of vaccine filters to India's vaccine manufacturing effort. This will help India make more vaccines, and it's only one effort among many to help India's COVID-19 response." Maha Siddiqui is joining us with more details on this. So just break this down for our viewers. What exactly is this White House representative saying?
Basically, Zakka, this is something that we have already been reporting. He is clarifying that technically there was no ban on export of raw materials for vaccine manufacturing by India, which Adar Poonawalla had been asking. So Adar Poonawalla had been using the word ban and embargo. Technically, yes, there was no ban or embargo, but the Defense Production Act that was enforced by the US, that was in fact put into enforcement by the US President by an executive act, was meant to prioritize raw material included for vaccine production for America first. This was done by the US president, and he had just taken office at that time, Joe Biden, because of the number of fatalities that US was seeing at that point and the number of infections. So he had put into motion this Defense Production Act that actually asked American companies to prioritize for America. Now, even though technically there was no ban, American companies were obliged to first give the raw materials to America for vaccine production before they could send it out to India. Now that it is clear that America has surplus vaccines, they have now allowed for those raw materials to be sent to India. But the request from India had been pending for over a month now. Taranjeet Singh Sandhu, the Indian ambassador, had taken up this matter in the beginning of March with the American side because it was pretty obvious by then that America had enough vaccines for itself and there was no need for them to continue with this Defense Production Act. That clarification is coming from America at a time when there is some amount of criticism that they not only allowed or rather not allowed for the export of these raw materials, but they have surplus vaccines as well, which they need to share at this moment with other countries.
All right, Maha, we'll leave it at that. Thanks very much. So this has been for a number of weeks now, both publicly and certainly behind closed doors. There's been a lot of wrangling between Indian and American authorities, which finally resulted in the decision late last night, this morning. Joining me on the Talking Points, Suhasini Haider is the diplomatic editor of The Hindu, K.C. Singh, former secretary in the Ministry of External Affairs, Michael Kugelman is a South Asia expert at the Wilson Center, and Zafar Islam, Rajya Sabha member of Parliament and spokesperson of the BJP. K.C. Singh, what has this episode taught us? I mean, we are supposedly strategic partners. I mean, there have been prime ministers who've talked about this being the most important relationship of the 21st century. But for the last 2 months, both publicly and more importantly in private, there's been this intense wrangling going on between Indian and American authorities, finally resulting in yesterday's common sense decision. Why has it taken so long?
Look, I think there is miscommunication on both sides. Both sides have not been able to, because the crisis broke so rapidly in India. We were telling, our Prime Minister was saying that we are Vishwa Guru just 2 months back. We said we are, and then when the Prime Minister Biden himself had the Quad Summit, we were sort of singled out as the answer to the developing countries' need for vaccines, because we were the focal point of vaccines. Now, within a month, it changed so much because the government was not able to anticipate that with all these bans lifted on political rallies, on Kumbh Mela, on various things, that this will spread so rapidly. Therefore, I think even Americans were caught by surprise because we were telling them a month ago that you are the supplier for the whole world. And then all of a sudden you're demanding that. And look at it from Biden's point of view. He came in after Trump had really ravaged the country with his mishandling of the COVID in America. They had the largest number of deaths, largest number of cases. And therefore he came in saying, I'm going to handle this. This is my top priority. And therefore he invoked the Defense Production Act within 2 weeks of taking over. So which means he said, we don't care what anyone else in the world requires. We're going to first handle us. He said 300 million shots in 100 days. And in fact, they were able to get them in less than 100 days. Now, in this, if we land up there and we said, look, we need this, we need that, I think there's miscommunication on both sides.
Okay.
They showed insensitivity in the beginning. Some of the public discourse was not proper on the American side. It should have been handled more deftly, trying to understand the Indian problem and how the crisis has arisen. And therefore, the minute it went in the public space, I think that's what made it toxic. But I think it's been contained. It's
For
in
now,
the process of getting contained.
which is fair enough, and which I guess is a sign of the resilience of this relationship. But let me ask Suhasini Haider, just for a moment, if instead of the Biden administration, this was the Trump administration that was still in office, and they had resorted to what we've seen over the last couple of months, everybody would have called it trade protectionist, and people would have gone to town. There would have been editorials in the Wall Street Journal and in the New York Times. Somehow, when the Democratic administration does it, it's viewed differently. Why is that?
Possible. I think, Zakka, that the expectations from the U.S., both because of the bilateral relationship and the strategic relationship, the multilateral commitment to fight the coronavirus pandemic, as well as India's own efforts to help the U.S. Remember when Mr. Trump practically put out a threat last year over the supplies of HCQ, the drug hydroxychloroquine. India provided the drug to the U.S., lifted its own ban on exports of HCQ, and sent it as a grant to the U.S. So I think the expectations were higher over here. And I'm not sure that there is a real difference in the reaction to whether it's the Trump administration or the Biden administration that seems to be holding it up. I do, however, feel that there was a slight, because of the mismanagement of expectations, there was a slight overreaction in India as the U.S. seems to be working out what its stance would be. I think, for example, on the vaccine ingredients, what they've made clear is that domestic production is a priority. But that doesn't mean that they will ban all ingredients from coming to India if they are necessary. I think the U.S. is joined along with the international community. We're hearing from not just the U.S., 14 or 15 other countries where there will be supplies coming into India. And I think that the heavy emotional baggage that was attached to this idea that Mr. Biden hasn't tweeted or, the U.S. hasn't offered to help was perhaps a little overdone.
Okay. Let me ask Zafar Islam, one of the things that this episode has, the episode of the last 2 months has taught, and I go back to what the State Department spokesperson said last week, that the priority for the U.S. administration is to vaccinate all Americans, and well and good. Nobody has a quibble with that. If that is the case, should India recalibrate its own expectations, as Suhasini said, in its relationship with Washington? And two, the larger question that's being asked, not just here in India, but folks in Europe are asking this. America is sitting on like 500, 600 million doses of vaccine, 2-3 times its population. What's it going to do with all of this stuff? I mean, here is the sort of leader of the free world. Doesn't it have a responsibility to countries around the world, including its own partners and allies first?
Well, let me respond to you, Zakka. First of all, both India and US have very strong relationship. Whether it's Biden or it's Trump, it doesn't matter. The depth of relationship is very strong. And it is very evident from the fact that the support from US is coming through. Secondly, whatever has been said in the media or whatever speculation has been made in media, but one has to understand that no country, be it US or India or for that matter any other country, does not exist in isolation. We were part of the globe, and every country needs support of another country in different needs, a different time and different type of needs. So obviously, the US administration also understands that right now India needs support in vaccination, and something which has come through it, which will again be, because if you see the statement of Biden or for that matter, the NSA of the United States, their all statement is very positive and suggests that they will be solidly standing behind India in its in supporting the vaccination drive which India is pursuing, and whatever it needs to support to be given from US, so that will come through. There was some gap, yes, there was some gap, something in the media. I think it was more of a speculation than the truth, and I think that has been put to rest, put to bed by both the administration. I'm telling you that the conversation with you, or the dialogue or the engagement is between the two countries were on, and it is unfair to even assume that US will not support India, or for that matter, India will not support US. Every country has its own requirement, has its own constraint. Within that constraint, they have to support each other, and that's what India is doing. That's what US will have to do.
Fair enough. All I'm saying is the story actually really came to the fore in a public way when Adar Poonawalla tweeted and, in fact, tagged Biden and put out that tweet. That's when it really, the story really blew up. But let me go to Michael Kugelman and ask him this. Just the sour taste in the mouth, if you will, that this episode has left. And combined with that, some of the things that we've seen recently in the last few weeks and months since this new administration came into office. We've had this rather curious and bizarre incident of this US naval ship, coming in unannounced into Indian Ocean region waters. You've had what at that time seemed a bit innocuous, but at least in hindsight, it seemed like sticking out like a sore thumb. The issue when Lloyd Austin, the defense secretary, was here, and he made a point about, the CAA Act here in India. There have been quotes and statements from the new U.S. administration officials regarding Kashmir and regarding certain other internal developments here in India. While on the face of it, all of this seems unconnected, here in India, there seems to be a view that, look, there are going to be some niggles in this relationship. It's not going to be like the free pass that Trump seemed to have given India on some of these issues.
Yeah, I know that there's a perception among some in India that Democratic presidents are not as friendly to India as Republican ones are. I don't think that's true. I think things were very good for the U.S.-India relationship during the Obama years. In fact, they really got quite good. But in terms of what to make of this current situation for the relationship, I think it'll be fine. Certainly, I understand and agree with those in India that believe the very long and inexplicable delay from senior U.S. officials to even acknowledge publicly the scale of what was happening in India, that's problematic for the relationship. And I do think the U.S. government got the messaging all wrong. It should have said much more, much earlier in terms of expressing issues of sympathy and solidarity. No, the fact that you had the Iranians, the Chinese, the Russians, even the Pakistanis offering statements of support or even offering assistance before the U.S. had, the optics of that are not very good for the U.S. at all. But more just from a moral imperative as well. The long silence of the U.S. was very unfortunate. But the relationship will be okay. Mark my word. I think that there is so much goodwill and trust that's been built up over the last few decades. The U.S.-India relationship is probably stronger now than it has been for quite a number of years, if ever. The trend lines are very positive. And at the end of the day, you have very strong convergent interests between the two that are going to remain intact, and particularly those that revolve around pushing back against China. And this whole situation with COVID, as troubling as it is with the delayed U.S. response, I don't think that is going to leave a lasting scar on the relationship. On the contrary, I mean, certainly it's a setback, but I would describe it as a setback and not a deep scar. And I think that particularly once the U.S. bureaucracy gets moving and it puts together this aid package for India, which it's in the process of doing, once the two sides continue to speak on high levels, which they already are, I think that will return some stability and equilibrium to this relationship. What would be great is if President Biden were to have a call with Prime Minister Modi. I think that would be a nice touch. We'll see if that happens. But the fact that you have had these conversations on high levels over the last few days, that's a good sign of where things are going.
Ambassador Casey Singh, were you surprised that the resolution to this episode happened at a conversation between the two NSAs? You wouldn't imagine that, export or embargoes on export of vaccine raw material would be something that would be top of the agenda in a phone call between the two NSAs. I'm just curious if that surprised you at all, and what does it say that the resolution came in a meeting of the two national security advisors?
No, I don't think it's always that simple. That is the visible part. The decision would have been taken already through diplomatic channels, ambassadors were at work, communication had already started between the two sides, and there would have been internal discussions in America. Whereas when they were ready with it, that's when the discussion took place. Now, I don't think it's always that one person gets it done, and it's a larger realignment within US, where they got out from their cocoon of addressing their own issues. Because remember one thing, that they're having a second spurt. And the second surge in America is quite dangerous because it's the younger people who are falling sick. 45,000 people are again back in hospitals. In Michigan, there's a major surge. Now they don't know. And again, it's the mutant versions which are there. The double mutant, not so much as the British one. So the Americans are preoccupied with what's happening in America. And therefore, when they woke up, and I think they woke up when the news was front page news. It was right there on the New York Times with the cremation ground pictures. That would hurt anyone. I think President would have seen it because he reads these papers. And once he saw it, I suspect it was a top-down movement where then the movement started. They realized they're missing the bus and the relationship might end up damaged and become toxic. And then once it goes into the public space, it becomes very difficult to recover. And that's when I think the dialogue was set up. I don't think the dialogue triggered the decision. Decisions were already made. The dialogue was kind of a way of conveying what they had decided. Now, we can put it any way we want, but that's not the way diplomacy functions.
I want to ask Suhasini, I mean, just a few weeks back when they had the Quad meeting, it was decided at that time that India will be the sort of fulcrum, if you will, for manufacturing of vaccines, particularly for the developing world. I'm just curious. I mean, all of that suddenly changed in a matter of a few weeks. So much so. So the question that many are asking is, at the end of the day, is it because the Biden administration wants, you know, American pharmaceutical companies, or Pfizer or Johnson and Johnson, to be the predominant vaccines around the world, and therefore they get primacy around the world? Is that what led to this?
You know, I'm not sure there's any sort of sinister reason behind it, but it is true that the U.S. government does listen to its pharmaceutical companies, does listen to its private industry, and even when that Quad decision was made to produce 1 billion vaccines of Johnson and Johnson in India, many had pointed out the dichotomy, the contradictions in the US's stand, because at one level they want to produce these 1 billion vaccines in India. At the other, they had invoked this Defense Production Act as early as February, saying that they would prioritize domestic production. The second part to it was that while India and South Africa have been battling at the World Trade Organization, asking that nations put aside their intellectual patents just for the coronavirus pandemic, the US has actually been opposing the Indian move. So it just did seem very contradictory even at that time. Look, America has a certain policy, and India has been hoping for the last year that some parts of that policy would be changed or at least amended for this short duration. One part has been on the vaccine ingredients, which Mr. Poonawala spoke about, but as you pointed out, this is something that can be resolved if there's political will. The second was about allowing these kind of patents to be put aside, not just on the vaccines. We're now finding that even on remdesivir, there are patent problems because remdesivir has only licensed 10 companies around the world in India, Egypt, and Pakistan. Most of them are in India, and they are running short right now of manufacturing capacity. India is unable to get that drug from anywhere else, so they're hoping that the U.S. will allow Gilead, which owns it, to ship those to India or to put off these patents. And the third request has been about vaccines. You know, the U.S. does have excess vaccines. It certainly has AstraZeneca in excess, which it's not planning to use at present. And there's been the hope that the U.S. would share that with India. What has also happened, Zakka, and it's not just about the India-U.S. relationship, is a questioning inside India. That if the U.S. can turn around and say, and I'm paraphrasing the State Department spokesperson, that really taking care of American interests is in the interest of the world, why is our government not asking that question about India as well? Why did our government not sit in January and say, here's how many vaccines India needs? And India, as the second most populous country in the world, has interests as well for the world. If they had staved off this pandemic somehow in India, the second wave of it, then it would have been in the interest of the world. And could the fact that India exported 66.5 million doses of the vaccine abroad, instead of planning them for internal consumption, and certainly I'm not including the subcontinent in it because the neighborhood is we're all part of the same region. But I'm just saying that question is now being asked after the U.S. made that statement.
So Zafar, respond to that. If the U.S. can say Americans first and all Americans have to get vaccinated and the American industry has to be protected, then why can't India do the same? After all, you know, we were going around exporting vaccines under Vaccine Maitri to about 80 odd countries.
Well, Zakka, you have to understand, we are not having the identical situation. We had to import raw materials from different countries, and as I said earlier, that we do not live in isolation. We also have, when you have to import raw materials, we also have to export to make certain commitment to the rest, other parts of the other countries as well. So that is what we had done, because we have to import. Right now, when cases had surged here, then we had to request those countries that we cannot export to you right now because we need it in India. But we do need raw materials, and we are getting raw materials from those countries. even though country which is holding, like for instance, you were talking about US has more than the doses they
3
require.
times, yeah.
But let me tell you, no country can afford to have to live with this kind of a stigma that they were not supporting humanity and they are trying to hoard vaccine in their own country. Every country will have to come to support to each other, and that's what the Americans are doing now, and they will continue to do that. If you see the Biden's
Okay.
tweet and the NSA's tweet, that is a testimony of the fact that they are willing to support, whether it's under pressure, whether it's because of the bilateral relations, whether because of X, Y, Z reason, but they cannot prioritize the interest of their own country, but they have to
that's a
prioritize
different,
the interest of
yeah,
the
that's a
humanity.
different debate. I'll give Michael the final word, 30 seconds. What about this extra vaccines? I mean, AstraZeneca itself, which the US has said is not going to be used, at least not for now, in the States. Why doesn't the US, allow other countries to access that or sell it to other countries?
I think that would be an example of some low-hanging fruit. Indeed, those AstraZeneca supplies lying around, they haven't received official approval to be used in the U.S. So, there's plenty to go around from the other vaccine companies. So indeed, why not send them abroad? But bottom line here, the administration has to walk a very fine line. As was mentioned, it wants to be very cautious. It wants to hedge against the possibility of another surge in the United States, even though the vaccine campaign's in a good place. So it wants to be careful about sending so much abroad so quickly, but at the same time, it recognizes if the U.S., this administration wants to restore U.S. global leadership, it wants to return to that role of playing the world superpower in ways that are positive by providing supplies to the world in places that need them. So, I think the administration will need to find a happy medium here between being cautious with maintaining supplies to ensure there's enough at home, but at the same time, trying to do what's necessary to show the world, convince the world that this administration really means business and it wants to do what it can to help those countries, including India, that could stand to receive some of these extra supplies.
Hopefully this was just a blip these last couple of months, but we'll see how this sort of sets up the relationship going forward. Thanks very much to Zafar Islam, Suhasini Haider, Casey Singh and Michael Kugelman for joining us. As we wrap up, just a quick note, we've been running this campaign here on CNN News 18. Vedika, she's a 9-month-old baby. She's been diagnosed with spinal muscular atrophy type 1. It's a serious genetic disorder. It usually kills babies before they turn 2, and it can only be treated with a 16 crore injection that should ideally be given before her first birthday. The family is currently fundraising through Milap, an NGO, and they've already raised about 4 crores. Your small contribution can help Vedika get the cure at the right time. You can donate by visiting milap.org/Vedika. Thanks for tuning in.